Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us today for this very special panel, Art as a Vehicle for Social and Political Change, with Bay Area artists Mark Jayson Quines, Marissa Lee, and Pixi Castillo. We will be starting momentarily. We're just waiting for more folks to hop on, either on the Zoom or on YouTube. Okay, we're gonna get started. Good afternoon, thank you again. My name is Melissa. I am a library worker at the Eureka Valley branch here in the Castro. I'm very excited to be here today as a moderator for this panel with artists from the Bay Area that I really respect and admire. Again, the artists who are joining us today on this panel are Mark Jayson Quines, Narissa Lee, and Pixi Castillo. I'm going to start just with some announcements and some housekeeping. So we are in a webinar. We will have a Q&A portion towards the end of the program. You will see a Q&A tab right there on the bottom. If you have a question, please do type it there in the Q&A portion, in the Q&A little tab. There's also, I believe, a chat, but yeah. Questions and the question and answer portion will be reserved for the end. We just wanted to start this program off first by providing this land acknowledgement. So, just acknowledging that we are on the unceded land of the Ohlone tribal people. And we wanted to acknowledge the Ramaytush Ohlone tribal groups and families who are the stewards of this land that we reside on. SFPL is committed to uplifting these lands and the community members and nations with whom we live together. The library system also encourages you all to learn more about first-person culture and land rights, and we are committed to hosting events and providing educational resources on these topics. We also wanted to just briefly acknowledge the rise in violence among the Asian American API community. It is Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month, and what better time to acknowledge the just the rise in violence and the terror that many of our community members have faced. And there is a statement by the SFPL Racial Equity Committee regarding the recent violence. We can include a link to that statement in the chat. But the library really, we are not a neutral institution. We stand in solidarity with the Asian American API community that has been facing this increased violence just in this past year alone. And of course, we know before that as well. And really wanting to uplift that both anti-Asian violence and anti-Black violence are connected to the white supremacist system and the white supremacy. So we really wanted to just make sure that we acknowledge that as well today. Just another reminder to keep wearing your mask. We know that folks are getting vaccinated, but please do, for the safety of others, to continue wearing your mask. And this is some beautiful art by Samuel Rodriguez. There are a few programs, more amazing programs coming up for Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. There's one next week on May 12th. It's a presentation called Facing Mecca, Reflections of Islam and Art, and that is in partnership with the Asian Art Museum. You can see all of these events on our website. and you can register. We also have a conversation between two of these authors, Mia Manansala and Gigi Pandian, Arsenic and Adobo and The Alchemist's Illusion. That's on May 18th at 7 p.m. There is another program on May 19th with the author Louis Godin, Freedom, Justice, and Decolonization on May 19th. And we really wanted to uplift the Total SF Book Club, Home Baked by Alia Voles. That is on May 20th at 7 p.m., as well as the On the Same Page book by Vanessa Hua, A River of Stars, and she will be in conversation with Yalitza Ferreras on May 24th at 7 p.m. So please don't miss any of these amazing programs that SFPL is hosting and in partnership for AAPI Heritage Month. There's also another event on May 25th called Chinatown Pretty and the Romance of Chinese Poetry on May 27th. Okay, we're going to get started. I am first going to introduce the artists and showcase some of their work, just so that you all get to know each of them. And then afterwards, we'll begin our panel conversation, where I'll be moderating and asking the panelists some questions, again, about how they both view and use their art as a vehicle or a tool for social and political change, especially as we've mentioned with the recent rise of violence among the API community. And I think additionally, just political turmoil, not just locally, but nationally and internationally. I know these artists are responding to things that are happening, not just here in the San Francisco Bay Area, but also using their art to respond to things happening around the world. So we'll get into that conversation. But again, first I will introduce all of our amazing artists who are joining us today. So the first artist I'll be introducing is Mark Jayson Quines, who is a photographer from the Bay Area. He works with photography to explore contemporary subcultures, and his work features cultural iconic themes that deal with value, commerce, and identity. He had a solo exhibition, Nobody, and used Michael Jordan as a metaphorical vehicle, connecting his ubiquitous image through ephemera and people in urban communities. He also follows other projects, also consider converging interests with his youth and current observations of having been born and raised in the Bay Area. So I'm going to showcase some of his amazing photography, and then afterwards we'll we can ask Mark some questions about his work. Next, I will introduce Marissa Lee, another artist who's joining us today for our panel. She is a filmmaker who produces digital and online content and films, and her short films have screened in film festivals statewide and internationally. She also got an audience award for Best Short Film at the Frameline Film Festival in San Francisco. And Lee would like to use her film to reverse climate change, depose corrupt leaders, and cultivate community resilience and international solidarity. So I'm going to go ahead and share a video clip really quickly.
Mainly activism. you're coming home.
Rise up. We rise up. Stand here, mga kasama. I see a bright future because of you. Because of the thousands of Filipinos who took to the streets all over the Philippines. Because of workers all over the world organizing to break the chains of exploitation and slavery. The state of the Filipino people is here in the streets of San Francisco. Our voices reverberating, our chants drum beating in front of the Philippine consulate, exposing lies, deceit, and neglect of the executive regime. People power now! People power now! When human rights are under attack, what do we do? Stand up, fight back! What do we do? Stand up, fight back!
And we're going to go from here to the headquarters of the Department of Homeland Security in downtown San Francisco to right.
Yeah!
A little bit louder. A little bit closer. A little bit closer. A little bit closer. A little bit closer.
Does she remember you? I think I'm familiar to her, but I don't think she knows who I am. That must be hard.
Mainly activism is
And the last artist I'll be introducing is Pixi Castillo, who is a Filipino-American activist and artist. She uses writing, printmaking, painting, and both digital and traditional illustration to convey concepts of liberation and national democracy with a socialist perspective. She is inspired largely by the Filipino people's struggle for genuine and lasting peace in the Philippines and by BTS, Korean artist BTS, if you're familiar. Here's some of her work. Okay, so that was a brief introduction of our artists. Give them a round of applause for being here today. I'm very, very excited to be able to talk with all of them today and ask them a few questions about their art. That was just a glimpse of some of their work. And later on, we can ask them about some of the current projects that they have going on. So hi, y'all. How is everyone doing? Thank you so much for joining today, for being a part of this panel. I was able to, provide a glimpse of, all of your work, but I wanted to ask each of you a little bit more about how you kind of arrived at your art. So if you have specific influences or if there were life experiences that you had that kind of brought you to your art medium. So anyone can start, but please take it away.
Sure, I'll go for it. Hey everybody, I'm Mark. Yeah, and I also want to say thanks, Mel, for having us on board, especially for this month. Definitely important to highlight a lot of things have been going on, and also I think propping art, which is a very important thing. So I appreciate that. Yeah, how did I get to my work? Well, I think like as all of us here, there's like so many things that are coming in and out, especially with the birth of the internet. There's a lot of things, but my earliest memory is, and maybe this is like with everybody else when they discover their family's photo album. You know, it's not an uncommon thing, but I can't lie that I was flipping through my parents', I might have been like 8, I don't know. And I was flipping through my family's album, and it wasn't actually the photos, although those were really pressing to see how, you know, my mom was like wearing her nurse outfit in the Philippines, and my dad was like trying to look very swag with this Toyota car from the 70s. But I think I was really looking at the negative, and the negative, you know, you look at this thing and you're like, what the heck is this as a kid? Because you know the actual physical 4x6 photograph. And so I guess I didn't have the words for it, but I'm like, this is literally a physical memory. This object, this negative, is a memory. The photograph is what we're able to see after the fact to analyze this memory. That's kind of like how I've computed it. But yeah, a lot of other things too, obviously, like music. My brother was a big influence growing up. He was very large in introducing me to a lot of alternative culture and music and art and weird things. And obviously a lot of families and friends. But yeah, I can go on, but that's kind of like my earliest memory was the photo albums from my family.
Thanks, Mark.
I guess I'll go. So for myself, for film, I didn't really think of it as something to study or build a career off of, at least while I was in college. I was a community studies major, and a friend of mine sort of just asked me to take an intro to film class. And then I took that class, and I was like, okay, yeah, that sounds like fun. And then you watch a film and then you talk about it. And that was like the entire course. And I was like, you can major in this. And so I was like, okay, yeah, I'm doing that. I'm going to major in film because that seems like a pretty great way to spend my college career. And so I ended up doing that and thinking about it in terms of a skill or a tool to use. And then I ended up dropping community studies, but that's a different story. But yeah. And looking back, I should have known that that was something that I was really gravitating towards was film, the film medium, because my first job was at Blockbuster, and then I worked at Live Video. If you're from San Francisco, you know that's like an iconic establishment, and so it's always been something that I've gravitated towards, this medium that seems just like a really powerful tool to shape culture and to enjoy as well.
Hi, I can go. Yeah, I also want to say thank you to the San Francisco Public Library and Melissa, Mel, for also inviting us to be on this panel, especially this month, and with all of the, kind of different social issues that are happening right now. Getting to like visual art and illustration, I think for me, I'm a younger sibling. My older sister is actually like the painter, or like she would make these like really large scale portraits of her favorite like movie characters. I remember like growing up and watching her paint like I really like large canvas of the characters from like the Labyrinth. Like so she would like just paint really like realistically, very talented. and I wanted to be like her too. But I didn't get into like illustration until more recently. I started, I think, more in middle school and high school with like writing, and then eventually wanted to find a way to get points across, even if folks couldn't necessarily like read words, but could see more like visually. And I think also, yeah, growing up in internet culture, just like knowing how I think I've also become like a very much like visual person too. And so wanting to figure out how to portray different concepts visually, and how to do that. And then kind of like looking more into it, and seeing that it's really an art. And so I think from there, and then also beginning to get tapped to make flyers for different events and activities, especially in college when I joined student organizations at SF State. And so from there, just started more and more like the visual aspect of things with like design. And then in, I think 2018, I just was immersed online with a lot of really talented like digital creators. I watched a lot of like, I still watch a lot of illustrators on like YouTube who do like tutorials, and yeah, kind of like found myself like, oh, I don't want to just like be on the sidelines or just like watching things. I want to like create things too. So just started trying to do more illustration, particularly like 2018.
Yeah, thanks all of you for sharing your kind of the departure point for your art. So like, you know, something as simple as photo albums, I think that's huge. And then, you know, having siblings who also introduce you to things or do art or things that you're like, oh, that's so cool, or taking a class randomly and you're like, oh, this is awesome. So it's really great to hear kind of how you all started off with your art and how it's really like the trajectory of it and how it's developed over time. And so this is more of a broad question, but if each of you wanted to answer it, what do you think an artist's role is in society? And anyone can start.
Yeah, I saw that question actually, and it's interesting because like that same week I like pulled out my phone and I was like, I have to write this thought down, and I like wrote down a few points. So I'm really glad that you put this on. And I think the role of an artist in society is to, I mean, in a nutshell, show and express how it is to live today, right? Like I think um, if you look at something you photograph or made maybe like 10 years ago, even just like, you know, yesterday, it kind of shows you the state of mind that you were in at that period in time. And I think that also shows, I mean, that's really important to document. Depending on what it is, I mean, I think for the most part, it shows your state, what your thoughts were, what was happening. And it's a very powerful tool to showcase. I think another thing is to challenge the ways of thinking, living, seeing, communicating. And, you know, one thing I was thinking about is even just the way we communicate in words, right? I think that in itself, for me, for example, I have so many thoughts in my head that, like, how are you able to express these things, rather if it's words, which is very urgent, because that's a tool that we have immediately. Or if it's something like a canvas, or if it's like you know, video. I think those are different ways of communicating that in a more complex way. And then another thing I heard recently, it reminded me of it, but it was, you have to tell the story over again because no one was listening the first time. Meaning that, you know, there's nothing really quote unquote new, but but the role I think of the artist today is to share those stories in your own unique way. You know, you have to reiterate those stories because there's so many things going on, and we're inundated with so much information. We have to find these complex ways and also simple ways that can be the right way to message what we're trying to say.
I can go next. I think, yeah, very similar to what Mark was saying, but yeah, I really think that an artist's role in society is really to reflect back the conditions of what's going on in the current or currently, like what are the actual conditions of folks in the world, particularly yeah, whether that's like what's going on in your local neighborhood, what's going on in the US right now, or if you're also connected to like a homeland, what's going on back there as well, to really, yeah, reflect and kind of spotlight the different challenges, different contradictions, and especially I think the victories. I think with art and like particularly with visual art, it's a way to also yeah, kind of like dismantle what could be like a very like very intricate like issues, and like take it piece by piece to for whoever like is going to be like the audience or the people to start understanding you know what it is that they're going through in another, like reflected back onto them. Not that they don't understand what they're going through, but also that they can see what's happening, and also help to like make connections to like different issues. But I think, yeah, very much so to highlight and reflect back current conditions.
Yeah, I think I really appreciate how, Mark, you're talking about it as memory and like how people are at a particular time. And then Pixie, like what you're talking about, affirming people's experiences and like reflecting that back to them. I think that's really powerful as artists. And then I think also I tend to gravitate towards like sort of in terms of fiction, like surreal or speculative type fiction work, right? And what I love about the film medium is that this idea of world building and really creating a world that is either a version of the one that we're living in, or maybe a better one or a different one. And what I love about that is that it's really like the other panelists have said, like it's challenging the notion of what we have now, and maybe trying to shape what it could look like. So if we are critical of what doesn't serve our world now, what's not good for our society right now, and we're able to critique that and then also uplift communities, principles, and values that do serve to create a better world. So I see the work of the artist as working alongside and within communities that are marginalized, oppressed, or who are actively engaging in this building of a better world. And then also for the artist to help forge that, but through this creative medium. Like, how do we make that irresistible? How do we make this project of what I see as like, you know, creating either social change, political change, or just this project. That's like the ultimate art project, right? Is building a better world, I think. And I know that we're not always engaged in that, but also I think the responsibility of the artist is also to be very aware of our position in society, and to understand that, you know, our art is a statement. So what is the statement that we want to make? And who are we making that with? And also, who are we accountable to when we're making that, right? So yeah, I guess that's kind of a lot for artists.
Well, those were fantastic responses. All of you brought, yeah, I was like really, everything you've all said really resonated with me. I think I really appreciated, yeah, just the idea of art communicating something, you know, beyond words at times, or reflecting and spotlighting current conditions. Like Narissa mentioned, the affirming of people's lived experiences. So I think all of you have said, you know, what's happening now, what's currently happening, what's relevant to, you know, what people are experiencing or what people need. And I really love, Narissa, that you brought it back to like the speculative fiction. We are in a library panel, but this idea of world building, I think that's such a great way to put it. That is the ultimate art project, right? Like, how do we build a new world that that is actually quite necessary, especially as we're, you know, kind of, we've mentioned some of the things that are happening right now. So thank you so much for all of those really thoughtful and insightful responses. Yeah, I'm really taking away a lot of the things that you have all said. I think connected to what you've all shared around kind of reflecting how art reflects the current conditions of what's happening. I think I did want to bring it back to, you know, the rise in the anti-Asian violence happening locally and nationally. You know, there's been a lot of media coverage, and we know that it's not new, actually, that it has been happening for a very long time, since, you know, quite literally the inception of this country, and when folks started to come here. But I did read somewhere that there has been, just in the past year alone, I think over 4,000 cases that have been documented of just attacks on, you know, on Asian communities, elders. So I guess my question is kind of, you know, maybe carving out a space to just briefly talk about how it does make you feel as folks who, you know, are API and who are on this panel, but also if in any way it has influenced your own art or creative process.
Yeah, you know, I think I was hearing, it's not a new thing, right? I think it's something that's always been happening in the US, but I think it definitely was amplified. Start of pandemic, definitely started seeing a lot of news coverage on it, from elderly to parents and even kids. And even my best friend over in New York, he was telling me a few stories that he had living out there, making assumptions and calling him names on the street, and even when he would step into a convenience store. But I definitely think it's more heightened now, especially toward the end of Trump's presidency, and also the Atlanta 8. That was definitely one thing that really amplified it, especially for me. I think right away I felt very confused. You know, I think I was very angry, definitely, but a mix of confusion. And it was a strange thing where my senses were so heightened after that, and maybe that was like this sense of vulnerability, just kind of just hearing that from a lot of friends and a lot of phone calls. so it definitely was like a sensitive thing for me to feel, especially after the George Floyd murders. I think it was just like, I don't know, it just was so, I mean, I'm still putting it together because I feel like it's a conversation that's still happening, even in the workspace that I am in, which is, I guess you can call it the photo industry, where a lot of people are being very careful of like even the people that they photograph or how they photograph them. I'm not going to mention any names, but a conversation that I had just last week was, and he was very open to it. And I think it was great to have that conversation, which again, I think is what art can do in a lot of the conversation and propping, the rallies that we've had, especially here in San Francisco, is a gentleman I was working with. He was saying to me right off the bat, he's like, I just turned down 2 jobs. And he shared me the first job was photographing, again, I'm not gonna name any names, but it was a very famous Native American, and I might have given it away, but he basically was saying that he had to think about, maybe I'm not in the place as a white male to be in the space to photograph this Native American. Second job was kind of something similar for large brand. And again, he was like, well, maybe someone else should be photographing that. But then the conversation there, I think, sort of like went to, well, am I just gonna not photograph people, people of color? Am I just gonna be destined to photograph just 30-year-old something white men? And I don't know, again, I have more questions than answers. I think I'll say this, is that with the news coverage, at the beginning, I don't think they did a good job, or they knew to even talk about the anti-Asian violence. I just feel like that there was a lot of wait time, and there was a lot of not enough urgency. And I think that just calls on to the community to step forward and, be heard, make artwork, have these conversations, because you can't depend on the news to just amplify your anger all the time. And I think that's what art can really do. You don't need to rely on an institution or someone else to do it. You can rely on the tools that you have in your thoughts and literally share it out there. So.
Can you repeat the question again?
Sure. I think, I was just kind of thinking about the things you all said about the artist's role in society, and a lot of what came up was, kind of reflecting back what's currently happening, what are the current conditions that people are kind of facing. And so just based on, the more recent anti-Asian violence, has any of the coverage, or I guess, how has it made you feel, one, and two, if it has, you can speak to it. If not, it's fine. If it's influenced your own art or your own creative process.
I mean, personally, I think I've looked towards community-based artists to understand the situation more clearly, or to see what's happening on the ground, or photographers who are documenting all of the really amazing rallies that are happening around Black and Asian solidarity, to capture that. And it's difficult that, like Mark was saying, mainstream media is not going to really unearth some of the root causes of this anti-Asian violence, like hundreds of years of white supremacy. I don't know that we're going to see that on our local news channel talking about it in such a deep way, and to give us like strong analysis on what's happening, right? But yeah, it has been scary to see vulnerable communities being attacked. Yeah, and just growing up in San Francisco, I mean, I've heard instances, am I saying that right, of anti-Asian violence, like all through my life. And yeah, and I think what has happened on a national level, and the sort of permission that the people in leadership giving towards anti-Asian violence has been really scary. But we also know that this has happened through the entire history of the United States too. But to know people who have been attacked personally, and like in our neighborhoods, right, in residential neighborhoods in San Francisco, is really alarming. But yeah, I think holding on to sort of what are the community responses, and then how are we able to capture those responses, and what that looks like moving forward to really forge community safety, right? So.
Yeah, I think for me, I think of course, the mainstream media coverage, like, just makes me like flat out angry. And I think, yeah, if you're only looking at the mainstream news, then that's really like gonna be kind of, yeah, like it's just continuously like fueling like anger, but also like the way that some news, I mean, angry because of what's going on, but also I think to see some of the coverage happening in mainstream media that's also pitting communities of color against each other is also like angering too. So I think um, definitely it's been, yeah, looking more at the communities on the ground who've been, yeah, community artists on the ground who've been covering the different stories, and also like the community organizations on the ground, and being able to also like talk with folks. And although not everyone is doing like gatherings, I think there have been, like spaces, specifically like in San Francisco, where, yeah, communities have been able to come together to, yeah, to be in community with each other. And especially right now, while we're all like physically like distant, but also a lot of things have been moved online, like actually like processing like, yeah, like folks' different emotions, like being scared or being afraid, kind of like also, I know there's like a lot of people who like already like heightened anxiety just with the changes during the pandemic, but now even like, safety from the violence of like others around you, like that's also heightened. And so I think for me, like a big thing was like, yeah, how do I also explain or share with my family members, like my parents who are much older, also making sure that they also understand that, like, yeah, there are community organizations that are on the ground, in the, like, also in like the grassroots, that are also yeah, like doing things, responding to the violence in a way that's not covered by the media, so that they also have another perspective of what else is going on. It's not like solely shaped on like the 3 different news channels that they bounce from time to time. And I think it's like reflected in some of the work that I've been doing. Just generally, I think the hate and the different, like, yeah, crimes or attacks, and like violent attacks on like our elders and our different community members here. I think I tie it back to also the violence that's happening in other communities around the world, like globally as well, for folks to see that, yeah, that there's the attacks that are happening on our elders, like here in our backyards, and in our like neighborhoods and our streets, and also to show that there is also like attacks happening, like in the Philippines, in Palestine, in Colombia, but also not just like, oh, there's like so much like violence happening and like leaving it at that, but also like show, like to also connect that there's also organizations and there's also people's movements that are also really the ones who are responding in a way that's pro people to the different incidences and different attacks. So I think in a way, it's also for me, like also trying to reflect that with like different communities, but also just in looking at like what's going on and trying to help bridge the different like acts of solidarity that we're seeing like globally and locally.
Yeah, thanks, Pixie, for ending it on that note. That's actually a perfect segue into my next question, but I really liked that, that there was, that each of you, kind of shared that the mainstream media will not amplify the things that communities are actually doing to respond to the violence and respond to, not just the recent violence, but what we've seen for so many years now, right? And I think really thinking about how the acts of violence that we're seeing here are connected. There is like a link to what's happening in places abroad. And so my next question, Pixie, you've already kind of covered a lot of it, but what are other issues, again, not just locally or nationally, but also globally, that each of you think people should be paying attention to? And I think, not just the violence, right? Not just the like horrific images of what's happening in all of, everywhere. I feel like we're so bombarded by the terror of what's happening around the world. But I think where do you think people should also, what other places should people be paying attention to for like the world building that we're talking about, right? Like where are people building worlds anew in the face of the terror and just like this like really really horrible kind of like violence that's happening around the world?
Yeah, I had to tune out of the news for a period of time because I think I was so exposed to a lot of the violence and a lot of things that were coming to me, and I just felt just very, very depressed. And so there's a lot of things going locally, nationally, and globally always. I think it still pertains to violence, but I think police brutality is in the forefront of what I'm definitely seeing. But I think one thing maybe on the lighter side, mental health, like health and safety, is a huge thing. I think on a personal level, and also just giving that to friends. And I'm talking about just we're here in an immediate sense with your family, yourself. I think that's kind of in a local conversation and self. But another thing, I guess a conversation that has been coming up, and I don't know if this is tying in with the question, but I think housing crisis is definitely a thing. One thing that's been coming up, it's an ongoing conversation as well, gentrification, but more so these honey bears that are up with a particular artist named Finch. I'm more than happy to dive into it because it's a conversation that has come up. We are on Ramaytush land, or at least I am. So I'm happy to speak on it. But I think that's another topic that comes up. I know India is another point of conversation with the vaccines. I think in the Philippines, one thing that I'm interested in is J1 workers and how are they being That's a project that I would like to dive into a little bit further, but yeah, you know, again, I had to tune out of the news because I think I just had to do with my art, and I hope this ties in as well as I think, well, I'm being so exposed to a lot of this imagery that is, you know, very violent, you know, on both sides, you know, police brutality, but also, you know, us as Asian Americans stepping forth and, you know, having to be aggressive with our voices and standing up against a lot of the violence that has been going on. So yeah, I'm also curious on Narissa and Pixie's view, because I feel like, again, I had to tune out because I had to think about, well, how am I photographing these people in conversation to the imagery that I'm taking in, which are violent? Like, what am I seeing out in the world, in my communities, and how do I act as a mirror to share, you know, just like everyday living? You know, it doesn't always have to be violent. I think it could just be a picture of someone that you adore, someone that I think in my work, oftentimes when I photograph people, I see a part of myself in them. And I think there's a certain amount of empathy in that in itself that I think it's something that you don't see, because I think violence is very, it's a very visual thing. You know, I think you can see when it's happening and you point it out. But I think what I try to do in a lot of my photographs, they seem just like an ordinary picture of someone standing in front of a camera. But again, like, that's kind of how our photo albums are. You know, they're these very vernacular pictures of us, of this document, of this point in time of, here I am, take me as I am, you know. And I think that elicits so much different things to mind than, I don't know. I think I see a lot. Definitely when I see a picture of, say, like I remember watching this video of Angelo Quinto, and there was a video of the officer, like, post the kneel to the neck, and that was very violent in my vulnerability. But then I saw this other video of Angelo Quinto, and he has this video of him, and I recommend anyone to watch it. It's such a great video of him. It's him taking a walk in Antioch, in a park in Antioch, and he's just sharing his thoughts. You know, it's very simple. It's very just him, you know, again, like kind of like a vernacular snapshot of him in his life. And it's not anything crazy, you know, it's not violent. And I think those are things are just as important to document as it is the violence. Because it's like, at the end of the day, what do you really want to remember, I think?
I think, yeah, it's such a large question. But I think some of the things that just come to mind for me locally is I've had a conversation recently with some colleagues about paying attention, or just like, you know, also understanding that, you know, we have our community members who or communities who are on the front lines. So thinking about like the global COVID-19 pandemic, but also how the pandemic has also shed a lot of like, or has pulled back like a curtain on many folks who are seeing that, like, these systems we had in place pre-pandemic, although like we were all going along our like merry way before, now with like when the pandemic happened, like we just saw the exposure of all the cracks. So we saw, we were talking about like, oh yeah, communities on the front lines and also on the fault lines. And so the ones that where we're seeing a lot of cracks is like the communities that are, you know, on the edges. So like working class communities, immigrant communities, especially here, like working poor folks in the US, and how like we're being affected like detrimentally with the different, like just with the conditions. So the impacts on young people's schooling, right? Like I know that's a big issue for families and for parents who are working, and you know, for those who have the ability to work from home, but then have, you know, a full-time job, work from home, and then also have to then like like address their child and like their child's needs of going to school every day online, which, you know, that's just like a whole nother matter in itself. And so and then also like of course our community members who are not able to work from home and continue to go into work, being the most exposed. And also, you know, I think in San Francisco, we at least there is um, like some protections or some thought put into it, right? Like into like the workers. However, like we live in almost like a bubble. I mean, at some point I felt like it was, especially when like they had all those colored tiers. And it was like, oh, SF is not yet purple, and then everyone else is purple. And but anyways, I think, yeah, we should be paying attention to our neighbors. I think one of the things I saw was just like the lack of basic things, like food. That was like a big issue. Food pantries, making sure folks have, yeah, something to eat. I think just going back to making sure, yeah, folks have like housing. What does that mean in a pandemic when maybe folks get cut hours or they're being laid off from jobs? And how are we like as community members, as like if you're also an artist, but also, yeah, how are we also making sure that, you know, we're not just creating in like a silo without seeing like other people. I think that's also something we have to like be wary of, because it's so easy to just like get your supplies and just like go do your own thing. And then I think, yeah, that also like reflects internationally. So how, you know, like with the crisis of COVID-19 and seeing that, you know, the response to it here was like very lacking. Still now there's like many people who haven't gotten like stimulus checks, and also some people who are like, well, what's like $800 like going to like get me to the next like partial like rent payment, but then like what comes after that. So even seeing how like where is that support that is supposed to be there, and so paying attention to how we act locally and how it is connected to like international, like how it can impact internationally. And so, yeah, like for example, in the Philippines, activists and community leaders and anyone who's showing dissent really are being attacked by this like administrative body called like the NTF LCAC. And so they're tagging community leaders and activists as terrorists and communists. And in the Philippines, like that's a death sentence. And so what they've even tagged, I brought that up because they're doing community pantries. And like community pantries, like the idea I think here is like, yes, of course, like we have pantries, but in the Philippines, like no one has, like there's no pantries. It's like an English word. But even like thinking about like, wow, these folks are just like trying to like have food like for anyone who needs it. And they're like putting up these like yeah, small carts, just like in the neighborhood, and like they're getting like tagged as terrorists. They're getting like attacked by their government. for doing these very like caring acts that are very much like, yeah, just like acknowledge what's going on with your neighbor and how can you help? How can you be in community with others? And so there's also, we should pay attention to those things here. There's the Philippine Human Rights Act that actually is trying to end military aid from the US to the Philippines. And I think of this because I have a lot of like friends or who are also still like in college, a lot of them who are like still paying full tuition amounts. And just like, it just boggles my mind. Is there so much support that like people on the ground need right now and have needed for the past year. And yet we're still seeing US aiding like countries like the Philippines to enact military like responses to like very human like needs like mass testing or like food, just like things like that. And so I just think about also like our communities here who also need the same things like food, assistance with rent, like these very like tangible things. And so yeah, if we can pay attention like locally and connecting to that globally, I feel like that's like some of the like a really big ask, but also something tangible that I think everyone can do.
Yeah, I think in terms of what's exciting, well, I'll start with what's like not so great, right? I think we are all going there as well. I know your question was what is positive, but like we're not doing so well, right? As a global society, right? I don't know. I think we look at the bigger picture. There's climate change. There's just vast inequity that exists on this planet. What indigenous people steward and protect like 80% of the biodiversity on the planet, but their communities are constantly being displaced and destroyed, and their lands being exploited, right? You have, 1 billion people using 80% of the world's resources. Like that's just so in terms of what I mean, that just boggles my mind, right? Like, so to me, what's exciting is the stories coming from the 6 to 7 billion other people, right? Like, what are they doing already? How are they, the rest of the world that's living under exploited conditions, who are the workers of the world, who are the peasants, how are they, and also neglected by many of the governments in the world, how are they surviving? How are they building communities? How are they building this new world? Because I just think that is where our solutions will come from people who understand the problems, the deep, and are affected by the problems of our global economic system so deeply, right? Like it's exciting that we live in a globalized society, but as individuals, as people, I think we're not always thinking about the globe the way that like multinational corporations are, right? Like they seamlessly are like, okay, where's the next land to exploit? Where's the next people that we can take advantage of in order to gain more profit? And I think as artists and as people in general, it's like, where are the communities that are really doing these exciting community building work, like Pixie is saying, community pantries. I mean, it's a form of mutual aid, but it's also confronting, the inequities or the neglect of the state in the Philippines, right? So I think that's exciting, that's interesting. Yeah, and then also being mindful as artists that art is a tool for this political economic system. it can either combat it, or it can sort of just go along with it, right? And not critique it, and just be like art for art's sake. But that in itself is like also political, right? It's just not, maybe not aware of its political stance. And so those are the stories. I mean, yeah, I think what was formative to me was Hong Kong martial art films from the 90s. I really loved those types of films because it was really the first time where I saw communities, films about communities, different community groups, and like fighting each other or fighting with each other, and it just felt very reflective of like my understanding of what community is, and I just didn't see that in Western media, where it's all, very much about the individual and about like finding what's true to you as a person, sort of separate from your community. And so I think art, like we understand that art also is a way that we can build a new language of how to be with each other, right? And I'll just go back to one more example, like or two examples, sorry, but one being like Chinese painting. If you look at ancient Chinese paintings, they're like vast murals, and you'll see maybe 100 people in the scene, right? And they're just scattered everywhere. And every scene, there's something intricate happening, right? And so this entire canvas that's about taking it all in as a whole and not centering any individual. And I just think that's fascinating. That's amazing. It's like a way that art is reflecting and also creating the types of relationships that we value, and the type of world that we value and want to see, right? And like, for example, Bollywood, before Modi came into power, the depictions of peasants were actually really positive, right? Like the peasants were heroes in their movies. And then now that Modi is in power, they actually they pivoted the focus to people who are more upper class. And then they started showing negative depictions of the poor communities. So then we have to understand how, our art is really being utilized and for what purpose. But also to reach out to those stories that we think might be not relevant to us, because ultimately, like what's happening in another part of the world, and the virus is a great example of that, it's going to come back and it's going to affect us, right? Or it does affect us, maybe we just don't see it. So yeah.
Wow, I'm so blown away by all of the things that you guys have shared. I'm like, you were the perfect panelists for this because I think you're all bringing up, yeah. I mean, I know that you all pay attention to what's happening. So I think it's really great the way that you're able to connect it to the role of the artist, or not even just to the role of the artist, but all of our kind of our collective responsibility, right, to pay attention to what's happening. And yeah, it is hard to be bombarded by so much violence and so much terror. But I think it's really, really great to hear the uplifting things that are happening in different places, the community pantries, or even just yeah, thinking about how art can continue to teach us how we can relate better to one another, right? So I'm like, I lost my train of thought because I'm just really blown away by what all of you have shared. And Mark, let's talk about Finch another day, because I would love to get into that conversation. But I think we're kind of winding down. I did want to ask one more question. I know all of you, we have our personal relationships, but just for folks who are also on the panel, how do you view art, or how do you think you use art, or other art that you've seen that inspires you to highlight campaigns or other people's issues. And I know you all have alluded to it in different ways, but maybe if you wanted to answer that question, and then if there are any organizations you're a part of or that you'd like to let folks know about, or current projects that you have going on, either individually or that are connected to the organizations that you're a part of, or the work that you're doing, in the world.
I can start. So yeah, a lot of the highlighted pieces from the slideshow that Mel was able to show earlier are all pieces connected to some kind of campaign that I was able to support with some artwork or submissions. Oh yeah, thank you. Thanks, Mel. So this one in particular, is this one is called Protect the Earth. It's a digital collage, but it was for the campaign for Justice for Brandon Lee. Brandon Lee, if folks are not familiar, is actually born and raised in San Francisco, but who's a human rights and land defender in the Philippines. So the place behind him in the collage, it depicts the area where he was from the mountainous regions in the Philippines, in the Cordilleras. And so this piece was created inspired by his story. He was actually also targeted by this Philippine state and had an attempted assassination against him. And so there was a huge campaign that many of us were involved in to bring him back to get the medical support that he needs. And so this was something that, I just wanted to do to support that. And yeah, I continued to try and submit this in other spaces too, to continue to uplift his story, because the campaign is still ongoing. So different ways like that. And then Cora Agaveda is a political prisoner currently in the Philippines, also part of the organization that I'm a part of, Gabriela, Filipino Women's Progressive Alliance, who she was a community leader whose office was raided in 2019. And she was detained and arrested with her child, who is depicted in this picture. So there's a bigger picture from the media that was taken of her breastfeeding in one of the precincts where they were booking her and her partner. And so, yeah, many of the pieces that I have are connected to different campaigns, like the political prisoners, different human rights based campaigns, different issues in the Philippines. And Zara Alvarez was also is actually a martyr. So she was actually killed in 2020 in the height of the anti-terror law debate that was going on. She was very outspoken against the terror law that Duterte is implementing, continued attacks on activists, and she was actually gunned down outside of her home. So this was also a piece dedicated to her legacy of continuing to fight for against exploitation and oppression in the Philippines, but also around the world. And there's many different also other pieces that I have. I have most of them up on Instagram if folks want to take a look. But yeah, those are some of the things that I have connected directly to some campaigns. And thanks for that question.
Does anyone else want to share? So I know my questions are a bit loaded, I apologize, but yeah, are you doing any art, or have you done art, or are you inspired by art that is highlighting any particular campaigns or people's issues, or organizations you're a part of, if you're a part of any organizations? And then if you wanted, yeah, if like Pixie just did, if you wanted to talk more about your work, just in general, or any current or future projects you have.
Okay, I'll go. Yeah, there was a period of time where I was, I mean, right now things have been picking up, so I've been doing lots of it, but definitely want to go back into it. Is a lot of the rallies that have been happening that Ankbayan San Francisco has been part of, with a lot of the other organizations like Malaya and Gabriella have been putting forth, and SF Chirp, iChirp. I've been photographing at a lot of those events, and I think that's been really great for me. Again, like the idea of memory and remembering these things, like I'll kind of just go through a few things within my folders and just be like, oh yeah, I remember that moment. I mean, it's weird to kind of say that in a very like digital asset kind of thing, because there's so much things that are going on in our mind. But that photograph, the same way that I found my parents' negative, was enough for me to trigger that, oh yeah, that was a place and time. I was in front of the Philippine consulate, and I was in solidarity with people in the Philippines. I was doing that with my local community. So definitely there was a period of time where I was like, it was back to back to back to back. I mean, it was, you know, more of the killings that were happening in the Philippines, and then I think there was another one that was happening. I think that was Bloody Sunday that they were calling it, or we were calling it. And then after that, this is all the same day, was I think it was the CCSF collective. I was with them and photographing a lot of the budget cuts that were happening. Still a thing, by the way, but I think it's gotten better as far as getting more budget to the education system. And then also there was another campaign, Free Mamiya. His birthday was actually not that long ago, but he's like an elder, you know, definitely another activist, someone that we should also prop up and support, and we also need to free. But you know, I wish I did a lot more, and I want to prop more things. But I think the thing that I've been doing is not propping necessarily just my voice, but trying to help out other people in my community. A lot of different artists that are even just doing things locally. Speaking on, there's an artist that a couple artists that I've been helping out here in the Excelsior. Just stuff that I think, like, we go into these neighborhoods and we see a lot of these billboards, or Instagram is such a huge thing, right? We see things being sold to us, or at least I do, that I kind of forget the sense of community and the imagery that that can be elicited from directly from my community. So I've been helping out with as much as I can with my resources, with like printing artwork, you know, photographing their artwork. I was helping out another friend with an event that he was doing. He was recording a live showing Silakbo, great musician, by the way. And I think it's in some ways I kind of feel like maybe this is me seeing other people's work again, like Pixie and Narissa, like, and even, you know, you, Mel, like having to put this together. Maybe it's just like I'm in my body seeing other artists doing these like really great things, and I want to prop that as much as possible. You know, I think my artwork is, maybe this is a little self-deprecating, but I think my artwork is okay. But I do believe there's this idea of a slow burn, in the sense that I think I'm more actually affected by the work that, Pixie and Narissa does. I think I look to you guys, and this is me just being very transparent, is you two are very involved in the community, and I very much adore that. And I think for the work that I do photographically, it's so everywhere. Everybody photographs, everyone has a camera, and I'm so involved in that aspect of it that it's interesting to kind of see what kind of going back to that conversation of like, what do people want to remember? Like, I'm interested in like, well, why do people want to remember this, or what do people remember, and how do you commingle with that? And I think like being part of an organization like Untitled in San Francisco, who's mostly youth and students, but I'm a little bit older, but I definitely akin to a lot of their attitudes of what's happening in the Philippines and bringing it here locally. Is that like, how do I do that with my own art? I think on when I was making a lot of my photography, it was very surface level. Again, like putting a mirror to what, there's a picture of me that in the slideshow, and I think I'm like 13, that's circa 2001. And I reflect back and I'm like, God, what was I into? I was like into DDR, Dance Dance Revolution. I was like wearing a freaking puka shell. My t-shirt is a Dragon Ball Z t-shirt. These are things that I think like a word that came up was this cultural consumerism that comes up of like, again, we're so inundated with this information. And look, here's an evidence of how an Asian American boy can grow up. And I think like being a little bit older, I'm 33 now, looking at a 13-year-old me, and those other photographs that I've taken at like say a car show, or even this boy in the street where I grew up in, this is on Avalon in Daly City, holding these Nike sneakers. It seems very cool and playful to be wearing these cultural icons and things from someone like say Michael Jordan. But in a weird way, I look at this photograph and I don't know if anybody sees this, but I see shackles. These sneakers also look kind of like shackles to me, in the sense that they kind of weigh you down. These things that are put onto us in a consumerist kind of way. These 150, onward to like $500 or $1,000 sneakers, they feel like shackles. And it's weird to kind of like see that now. Like it just seemed like this picture of this kid who played basketball, didn't want to get his shoes dirty, but at the same time, like, why is he holding these why isn't he wearing these shoes? Well, he thinks these things are of value. And so I guess what I'm curious on the other spectrum, when I see I wish I was, and I think maybe that's my next step for a few upcoming projects. I was gonna go to the Philippines and photograph, but then the pandemic happened, and I think that was going to be my way of engaging a little bit more in what was happening. I don't know how, and to be honest, I don't know how I make some of these projects, but I think again on the propping of voice, I ended up finding myself propping another person's voice who actually made a trip to the Philippines. He was photographing a lot of the EJK, which is the extrajudicial killings that were happening, which are very visual, a lot of blood, a lot of violence. Not that I showcase a lot of that, but I think in helping with that project, I was able to make some posters, some artwork for an event that we did called Outside Lands that was in September 2019. And we propped up, I think, close to, I believe like $3,000, was it? For Brandon Lee, who is shot by PNP in the Philippines. So that was definitely a success. But again, like I like propping other people's voices and having that conversation. What is that? How do I respond to that? Yeah, and I think that's very important as another role to kind of circle it back to the role of the artist. I think that's another thing, is to have these conversations visually, vocally, and it becomes a thing where it's like, well, what do we do about it now? And then you could take those next steps of what that could possibly look like in what, Narissa, you were saying, what does this like new world look like? when you put the mirror up and you see all this chaos, hopefully the next time you paint, you illustrate, you make a video, that it's closer to what you would want to than the last painting you did before or the last video you made before.
Yeah, in terms of what I'm doing now, hey Mark, thanks so much for those words too. That's really meaningful to hear that you've been impacted by the work, you know, in the movement, as well as other artists that are in community with you. I think for my own work, yeah, I think if you saw the clip, it's been filming rallies and filming that, capturing sort of the spirit of what the movement is up to in our local area, and like I said before, how do we make it irresistible? How do we make it so that people can see this as a viable option to be a part of, and to build a better world, right? And then also it's that aspect of building the relationships outside of the art as well, so that, you know, artists, sometimes we think of it as an individual endeavor. I think film is one of those really resource intensive projects that actually do sometimes require a whole crew, right? But how do we do it in a way that is not harming communities too? And how can we know that unless we are actively creating those relationships with communities, right? And that's like an internal conflict I've always had with film and documentaries, is that it can be just as extractive, right? The extractive industry, the fossil fuel industry. It's like, let me take what you have. Oh, let me take all these cool things from your people, your stories, and then let me make a name for myself. It's always been a conflict that I've had with the medium itself and how it's played out. But yeah, doing and it's taken the art form to a different place, right? Where I have been adverse to doing documentary work, but now I find myself doing a lot more. So, but if I'm doing it with community, then it feels right. Yeah, it doesn't feel extractive. And then currently in June, there's going to be a showcase. It's a Queer Women of Color Film Festival. And they asked me to do a project about how queer people have been creating space in San Francisco. So that's gonna premiere like June 14th, something like that, during Pride Month. So that's exciting. And then, but if I could be in multiple places at once, I mean, I would love to capture what's happening in Indonesia and in India. With Indonesia, like the workers' strikes that were happening. You just see the footage of it. You won't see it on mainstream news, right? But you see it on alternative media sites. It's just so incredible what's happening. And then in India with the peasant farmers protesting. I mean, that's exciting, right? It's like the billions of people who are really tired of being treated so poorly, right? And how are they holding it together? How are they already doing the work that is probably so much more advanced than some of us can imagine? But because of, you know, our standards of like who's smart or who has the right way of doing things is sort of distorted at this point. So we don't give credit to the people on the ground who are really holding up the world, right? So that those are stories that I want to tell, and then also the resistance that's happening and the struggle for self-determination in the Philippines as well, right? And so the organization that I'm with is San Francisco Committee for Human Rights in the Philippines, and yeah, since like 2017 or so, I kind of made a conscious decision as a film person to not really do personal work as much anymore. But then I did do quite a bit up until that point. And the work that I had done up until that point was really like using film as a way to process grief and mourning. And normal, usually, thematically, it was around my mom. So, but so we'll see. Every 10 years, I tend to do a piece about my mom. So we're kind of coming up on the 10-year mark. So we'll see if that happens again. But anyway, yeah. So it's been an honor to be able to do work within a community setting, and it's very different than I think how I used to approach the craft.
Thank you all. We are right at 4:31. I don't know if there are any questions, but I just wanted to thank each of you again so much. All of the work you do, not just as artists, but as community members, as organizers and activists, is so inspiring. And I'm so, so glad and grateful that I got to have all of you on this panel. It's been really, really nice to talk with all of you in this way. And I hope we can continue to. But we're already done. And I wish that it wasn't the case, but I'm not sure if there are questions. I know there's a YouTube live stream as well. I don't know if there are questions there. I don't see any questions on this end. But if you do have a question, maybe we'll give it like 2-3 more minutes. If you want to add one in the Q&A little chat, you can do that. And if not, thank you for joining us this afternoon. And yeah, just listening to these amazing artists talk about their creative process, talk about the way they view, art in society, in the world, and just for joining us for this program with the San Francisco Public Library. And one more thing, you can find all of their work there. You can go to their handles. I think it was already shared in the chat, but it's also in the program description. So they have websites, they got Twitters, they got Instagrams. Follow their work, and continue supporting the work they do. Again, not just as artists, but just as community workers and people who are really trying to build new worlds, like Narissa mentioned. Thank you so much, Mark, Pixie, and Narissa.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.